Hello, everyone. Welcome to Conversations in Education and Research podcast, a podcast about Chilean research and education with undergraduate students from Universidad de Chile, Talca, and Antofagasta, talking about their experiences in research, challenges with it, and implications of learning for the Chilean context. My name is Miguel Serna. I am a teacher at Universidad de Talca, and today I will be presenting the students and guests in this first pilot episode of our series. This first episode will be hosted by Benjamin Vera and Ignacio Dagach Abugatas, both students from Universidad de Chile. Benjamin is a graduate student in applied mathematics at Universidad de Chile, and Ignacio is a third-year student of mathematical engineer in the same university. His professional interest involves the teaching of mathematics. Today, Ignacio and Benjamin will be talking about the practice of doing research with Dr. Ola Pilerot. Ola is a professor at the Swedish School of Library and Information Science at University of Borås. Teaches and publishes within the field of information practices. He is also a member of the research group Information Practices and Digital Cultures. His research is centered on the big issue concerning people and their relationships to information, how and why individuals and groups of people find and make use of information, but also the consequences and outcomes of their information practices. In this first episode, we will be talking to Dr. Ola Pilot about the daily practices of doing research. Benjamin and Ignacio have research interest, and they have worked collaboratively over a month to discuss some important issues about what it takes to be a researcher, the challenges and the actions involved while doing research. Let's start this podcast.
Well, first of all, thank you, Ola, for joining us today. As first question, I wanted to ask you if you can walk us through a research day, like what you do, like concrete actions of your doing.
Yes, sure. First of all, I wanted to say thank you for inviting me. It's very nice to be here, and I'm looking forward to talk to you about my job as a researcher. But I'm going to be difficult already from the beginning because there are so many different research days. Because I tend to think about my research work in terms of projects or maybe studies that I do, which I think of as conducted through a process of various things. So it depends on where I am in the process. And I don't know whether you want to ask me for like a particular phase or so, but I could say something about in the opening stage of a research process or a research project, I would probably be reading a lot, being in my office, being at home, having big piles of texts, not necessarily books, but texts of various kinds that I've sort of have thought that I need to go through these in order to come up with a problem formulation, trying to argue for why this project is needed to be conducted and so on. So it's a bit difficult to answer that question, but I could also say that if I would be later in the process, and if I would be in my favorite part of the process. I am a social science researcher, which means that I'm interested in people, and I tend to work with methods that include people, even though there are exceptions from that too. But I, for example, conduct interviews with people that I would like to be in my study, or I hang out with people which I think of as working ethnographically. And that might mean that I'm doing research in places that I need to visit in order to meet these people, to go to places to meet them and make recordings and ask really clever questions that I thought out in advance before the interviews. Or yes, so it depends on where I am.
So your favorite part is like maybe doing this podcast.
Well, this, yeah, this is similar to. I mean, I like meeting people and I like to talk to people, and yeah, I suppose I'm a very curious person who would like to know things about the things that I've set out to investigate.
Interesting. Thank you for the thank you for the explanation. I mean, for us as I mean, we are every day surrounded by researchers, by professors or whatnot, and so it's very interesting to like have at least a glimpse of what goes behind, even if the areas are quite different. And so you seem to have a very clear view of your research process. How did we get here? Like, how did we? I mean, could you tell us how did you learn to do research? The action, like the discipline of doing research. How was that learning process?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is a question that could be responded to in more than one way. As you notice, I'm a bit complicated. I like to complicate matters, but
Don't worry, that is
one thing is that one answer would be that I've gone through research training, which is, I mean, once I applied to become a doctoral student, to go through the doctoral education, in which I took several courses, for example in research methods and theories and other things that I needed to read. And at the same time I was conducting my first big research project, so to speak. That's one answer. I'm a sort of formally trained researcher.
So like formally trained in PhD?
Yes, that's right. On the other hand, I like to think, and I actually believe what I'm saying now, namely that I've always been a bit curious, and I've always liked to write and to read, and that means that I've done things before I became a trained researcher, which I think of today as doing research. Mm-hmm. So how did I learn to do it? I'm not fully learned yet. I mean, I need to learn constantly. So, but I suppose the boring and short answer is that I learned to become a fully fledged researcher while I was doing my PhD education.
Perfect. Actually, it's nice because the next question is something you already brought up. Good topic. Do you remember the first time you did research? What it was?
Yeah. I mean, when you ask that now, then I started to think about something, and I didn't plan this in advance because it just popped up in my head now. I have a background before I became an academic. Before I became a researcher, I had a career as a librarian, and for a substantial part of my time as a working librarian, I worked in a university library. And my main interest or what I primarily did when I was working in the university library was teaching students how to use the library. And I sort of gradually over time started to pay attention to different groups of students from different disciplines, doing things very different compared to each other, even though I knew that they all had the opportunity to participate in classes which we called classes in information literacy, classes which were about how you do research or how you find things that you need to in order to do your master thesis or bachelor thesis. So I got very curious about why do they act in so different ways? Why do they make use of different kinds of information, these two cohorts of students? So that was the sort of origin for my master thesis. And it should be mentioned here as well, because I went to library school long time ago, at a time when you didn't need to do a master exam in order to be a professional librarian. Nowadays, most of them who are librarians have that. And I knew already at this early stage that I'd like to, in the future, see whether it would be possible for me to pursue an academic career and work as a researcher. So therefore I needed to have a master thesis or a master degree. And that was the sort of starting point for the topic of my master's degree, where I investigated 2 student cohorts or student groups and their respective ways of searching for and making use of information while writing their thesis. So probably that's at least an early example of some sort of research endeavor. But I also wanted to add that if I look back today at my master thesis, then I get a little bit embarrassed because I would have done things different today because I've learned.
It's quite interesting because talking in the past with, I don't know, mathematicians and other specialists, they tend to respond to the question of what was the first time you do research with a more academic thing, like my very first big project or something.
Yeah.
It's good to see other points of view.
Yeah. And can I add something to this? Because I think that one sort of fundamental criteria or a fundamental drive in my work is this curiosity. And I also have this sort of ideal for being a researcher. And this sounds funny, but I think I'm striving for having the gaze of a child, you know. I don't want to hesitate in asking silly questions. I will allow me to try to see things in the way where I'm not necessarily, taking for granted or assuming things about these things. I want to try to look at them from all angles and investigate things. And when I say things, I mean phenomena, issues or whatever we would call them.
I feel I can relate very much to that drive of having that child's gaze, like the way of looking at things. And while we're on that topic, because that implies that the way, like the observation of a child is very different from one of an adult. That implies a change. And what I wanted to ask you was, growing up, let's think, like you pinned down like a first moment working in a library as like first time doing research. Before that, like being, I don't want to tell us to mention a specific time, but generally growing up, what was your idea that research was like? What was your look on academics? Where did they have that child's gaze?
Well, that's a difficult question, but the way I understand your question is that you want me to say something about how did I think about research when I was growing up?
Yeah.
Okay. I probably didn't think about research when I was growing up. I'm not the first academic in my family, but I'm the first sort of researcher. I've got a brother who's an architect, and another one is a teacher, and so on. But I had this sort of, I don't know, when I was a doctoral student, and I'm going to try to respond to your question, but when I was a doctoral student, I was once asked to write a blog post to someone's blog about being a doctoral student. And I remember thinking that I feel almost a bit embarrassed to think of myself as a researcher, because my view of a researcher was someone carrying a white coat, having a magnifying glass in his hand or some instruments and so on.
Like a scientist.
Yeah, exactly, like a scientist. And I'm not a scientist. I'm a researcher. Maybe I would some days refer to myself as a scholar as well, but I think of myself as a researcher. So Well, you notice I'm bad at responding to your question right now, but so this sort of most honest answer is probably that I didn't think so much about it. And I've gradually discovered during my time as a librarian that I'm drawn to the discipline that is sort of fundamental for the kind of professional work that I did then, namely library information science, which is the foundation for library work. And I became more and more curious about it.
Thank you. Speaking of academic work, we as yes, because it's interesting because we have talked about these topics with other researchers before, and they are like scientists tend to respond differently. Well, as Ignacio pointed out, and we were about to ask you, and if you would be very interested to hear your thoughts about it, like about this notion that research is sort of that you have to be good in a field, in a certain field. I mean, for us, it's very much it's a topic that is like prevalent. You have a classroom and there are like 2 or 3 that are understanding the topic way beyond, and there's this like unspoken message that they are the researchers, the future researchers. And as someone who has been in contact with libraries as well as academia more generally, I wanted to ask if, like, what do you think about that perception that you have to be sort of good or to have lots of academic credentials, masters, PhDs, in order to become what is generally called a researcher?
Well, once again, I'm going to be a bit difficult now because it depends on what we mean with research. But when I'm talking about doing research here now or being a researcher, I'm thinking of the kind of work that I do, which is academic research. You know, I apply for funding. If I am lucky, I get funding, money, so that I can buy time and buy the stuff that I might need in order to do my research. And in a way, I'm not really keen on saying that not anyone can do research. But on the other hand, I tend to believe that, as is the case with most things that you sort of take on and do in life, you need to learn how to do those things. And some are more, what's the word, predispositioned, to do certain things. And I tend to believe that you actually need to go through some sort of formal education in order to become a researcher, even though I would also agree that there are people that are producing stuff that we could think of as research outputs that are not formally trained. So it's not exclusively so. But I think I learned a lot through my research education, my doctoral program. But you were also touching upon, you know, being among the best and
Best
you know,
and the brightest.
yeah, exactly.
For those people.
Yeah, well, you know, I know who. I mean, I know the kind you are talking about here, and of course, it's easier if you are very bright. But I wouldn't consider myself being, you know, bright in that way. But I'm very eager, and I'm very sort of curious, and I like what I do. So, and I'm very open for sort of picking up methods, and I try to be structured and work somehow according to the sort of book, if you see what I mean. But on the other hand, I also think one should be brave enough to break the rules and you know, follow your inner sort of ideas when it comes to ways of discovering that which you are interested in exploring or discovering. So my obviously very long answer here is that research can be done also by those who are not seen by others as the brightest, definitely. But you need to know, you need to want to do it, you know. So I don't know whether that was an answer.
Sorry. Here in Chile, it's like we all think as researchers as the people who got straight A's in their exams or something. But thinking of what you told us is more something like people that understand the topic and tries to give the way around, maybe understanding the topic in another way, wanting to do the job. Is that what you are trying to tell us?
Well, you know, where I come from, which is Sweden, you also need to have good grades in order to embark on the doctoral education program. But it's not only that. There are probably, I would probably claim actually that there are plenty of people that have the highest grades that wouldn't be able to write a good application for becoming a researcher. So, you know, you need to have good enough grades, but more importantly, you need to know things and to have knowledge, which is not always reflected in the grades, but quite often. So I suppose my bottom line here is that one shouldn't walk about thinking that I cannot be a researcher, if that is what one would like to be, because my grades are not good enough. I think there are ways of you know, getting forward, working towards that position, if that is what one is after. I think for me at least, it has been so that I've always I've always liked the sort of fundamental parts of my job as a researcher, namely reading and writing. And I was reading and writing before I became a researcher, and that was good for me because it wasn't so that I decided I'd like to be a researcher, therefore I need to start writing and reading. I already did that.
Based on what we have discussed today, what will you say to the students and future researchers of Chile? A word for us?
Yeah, I mean, I can honestly and happily say that being a researcher is a good job. It's a good job. This is at least my opinion. It's a good job because it's enjoyable, it's varied. You get to meet people if you want to, depending, of course, what you are studying. Yeah, depending on your field. In my field, social sciences, library and information studies, that's unavoidable that you need to you know, do new experiences. I like this dimension as well of sharing the communication and results that you've come up with. So I would like to encourage people to become researchers.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your words.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This is the end of the first podcast, so thank you to the three of you. This was wonderful.